Hey Wilmette friends, it is I, Ralchire, and today we're taking a look at this medieval handcart that I built. It is a fairly easy to construct project, really. It's all put together with mortise and tenon joints or screws wherever I can get away with them, but the idea is to have this collapsible so I can fit it in my car, so I can bring it out to events. And in medieval times they would have constructed in much similar way because they wouldn't have had access to nails and screws as often. I've cheated on a couple points, but if you look closely you can see where I've got mortises and tenons holding the pegs together. Handcarts were pretty popular for low class moving of lots of goods, right? Like peasants pushing carts of straw or dung or any sort of product they had to sell or something. It was not a very high class mode of transportation, obviously. If you're just a little bit richer, you can afford a horse cart, and it doesn't. And really, the difference between the two is very small. I could put a horse on this if the horse is not too big, which this is pretty small for a horse. So maybe a pony or something could pull this pretty easily, or even a goat. But as far as transportation in the Middle Ages goes, wagons and carts weren't really a preferred method of travel. Roads were expensive and dangerous, hard to maintain, and full of lots of rough areas. Any uphill section would be tremendously difficult with a heavy load, and any downhill section would be tremendously dangerous. In the American West also, the Mormons famously basically migrated to Utah with just handcarts. They didn't use a lot of oxen and wagons like we see with the rest of the settlers who went west. So this is, I call it a medieval handcart, but really this kind of handcart has been around from thousands of years ago to now in some places. If you look at some parts of the world where they have a rickshaw, it's very much the same. So I've got a crossbar here, and that helps when you're pulling it to support a lot of the weight, because you're able to push and pull pretty much in equal measure. Additionally, they weren't all like this. Sometimes they had handles that were sort of curved, or the beam itself would be curved upwards a little bit, so you're not tipping your cart over as you're pulling it, but it's more level with your height. And of course, bigger wheels would bring that axle higher, or bring that bed of the cart higher. But yeah, in the medieval times, like I say, this was not a super common method of travel, and you don't see a lot of it in art just because it was not a high-class thing. Just like you don't see, the Ford Fiestas very much in modern advertising. You see the Lamborghinis, right? But it was certainly prevalent. So we use it for our reenactment company where we want to go on long overland voyages, because medieval people also didn't really go on, let's say, trips where they carried a lot of gear, right? If they were merchants, they probably would, but if you're a traveler, you don't need to bring a tent and chairs and food with you most of the time, because it's mostly going to be from town to town, because the medieval world was very civilized, and there's a lot of inns and places where you could receive hospitality throughout. One instance of people obviously going on long voyages without a lot of resupply, however, is like a military campaign, right? And a baggage train would be a crucial part of that military logistics pipeline. And so that's essentially what I've got going here. Is imagine like a lance of a knight and his retinue, or maybe some mercenary company with, say, under 30 people in it, and not a lot of horses to speak of. This would be pretty much a good camp cart, right? Really, everyone would travel on horse if they could, and so saddlebags and things like that became more useful than this would have been. However, it's very nice to have. We've loaded it up on several trips before, going through somewhat rutted dirt roads. We haven't gone on any too strenuous trails with it, because when it's laid down and it, say, goes onto a hill or a slope, right, where one wheel is bearing all the weight and one wheel is bearing hardly any, that's a lot of strain. I've got these wheels are made of hickory. I didn't make them. They're the only part I didn't make. These are made by an Amish wheelwright that I actually found on Amazon. So quite affordable for what they are. And I would not recommend any kind of wheel besides a professionally made hardwood, durable wheelwright wheel. I had tried for the first section of my project just to use cheap decorative wagon wheels, and those are obviously cheap and decorative, so they kept breaking. So I was fed up with that and got 2 of these. Alright, so let's check out some medieval backpacks. So I've got 3 different solutions for basically trekking or foot solutions for carrying gear. The person who in the medieval times would have been hired to carry goods strapped to their pack or on their shoulder or something would be called a porter. The same word we get the word transport from, the idea of moving things from place to place. So the first thing I've got here is basically just a big canvas sack, could be linen, wool, whatever, and it's just got a slit in the top, and that lets you have a pouch on one side and a pouch at the other. And it's super comfortable just to sling it over your shoulder and then just go for a walk, right? It's not hard to balance the weight unless you're carrying a wildly unbalanced kit, but for especially light stuff like clothing that's comfortable against the body, and you pack everything so they're not clattering in there, this is quite comfortable. And if you need to adjust the weight, you always can. You see sometimes they're carried like this, especially if people are laden with lots and lots of goods. So this is a really easy to make, easy to use solution. It's a sack I call it a Martibo sack because it's found in a church in Martibo. I believe that's in Sweden. This is obviously probably the simplest of the options here. All right. Next. Very often in medieval art, when you do see backpacks, which they're not very common, very often they're wicker, and they are actually used in context of harvesting. So you'd be able to harvest your crops and just throw them over your shoulder and then go on to the next stuff without having to worry about finding a bucket for it or anything like that. So with this strap setup, I've just got basically leather just going through the parts of the basket, and then it ties at my waist, so it's quite adjustable, and as long as everything fits tightly, it's quite comfortable. So this is more of an agricultural tool than a luggage solution, but if you are a medieval peasant or you've got one of these at home, there's no reason you couldn't throw your stuff in it and bring it to market. And especially there are plenty of examples of people selling directly from these. So say if I was selling my turnips at the market, I'd reach back, grab a turnip or whatever, right? Again, they're not also not organized or anything, so modern backpacks have pouches and stuff. No, it would all be one item pretty much in here. That said, if we're trying to imagine how people might have carried their stuff if they had to, this is a good solution, right? It's obviously not waterproof at all, unless you wrap your stuff in a separate container, maybe like a canvas or linen bag inside of here. So this one is a little bit less historical, at least I shouldn't say less historical, it's less medieval. There are some illustrations of people carrying bundled up loads on their backs, and this is a pack frame like this is what they must have had to use, but none of the illustrations that show people carrying loads on their backs actually show the frames. So it's quite possible that they didn't have frames, or that the frames they were using were a little bit more low profile than this. However, this is based off of the one found on Ötzi the Iceman. He was found in the Swiss Alps, frozen. Basically had one of these. The oldest backpack we have, that's about 5,000 years old. So from about 5,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago to about the 1800s is pretty much the only two ideas of backpacks we have, backpack frames at least. There's no medieval bushcraft sources or any European sources from that time. Pretty much the Native Americans had packs similar to this, and the settlers ended up developing stuff pretty similar. But you can see I've got my bedroll here, and that would be quite easy to store anything in, right? I've got like some clothes and a bowl and a candle and just basic small things that can go bundle up in really easily. And I've got some boxes tied to here as well, and those could be used to carry a fire kit or maybe some food or a lunch or anything you kind of needed in a small setting. Additionally, you could just take everything off of this and just carry the frame, and you could lash whatever you wanted. You could lash your harvest, you could lash stuff that's bundled up, and like your hunt, you could, if you're hunting, you could bundle up your kill on this or something. Really, it does. There's not very many limits to this. You could even lash a Martibo sack to it, or just any old regular sack, or several different pouches, and maybe you're selling stuff at the market and you take a pouch off and you're selling a pouch worth of something, right? So again, this one's less medieval, but you know, there's definitely a place for it. They must have had some sort of pack frame, and this is the closest that I've got based on historical sources. I'm sure I could make something up and find something equally as historical, because again, it's just bushcraft kind of. You can see it's laced together, or it's lashed together, and there's notches cut into the wood. There's these straps just go over the bottoms of that frame. There's actually a single piece of elm for this main part, and it's heat bent around. And I did that myself in just a day, and it didn't take long at all. It was a very easy thing to figure out. So any medieval guy who had to carry some stuff could have said, hey, you know what? Let's throw one of these together in an afternoon. Okay. But throughout town, you'd probably just carry a pouch with maybe your knife, maybe a comb, maybe some coins if you really had to buy something. But peasants didn't actually buy anything with coins most of the time. They would just barter, so they didn't need that anyway. If you're 2 houses down working on the neighbor's farm, and well, he'll probably feed you. And if he doesn't, then you need to borrow something from him, you can probably get something. All right, anyway, I hope that was at least a little bit exciting, and I've got a big, exciting trip that has a lot to do with this stuff coming pretty soon here on the channel, and I can't wait to show it to you guys. Can't wait to get that event done and recorded, but it'll be a blast. Until next time, guys, Godspeed.